to kind of continue conversation. I don't know if either one of you were at Trevor, the workshop that he did, where that focus was on more of de-escalating like really overtly racist situations where someone's being abused, but it was focusing much more on the one that was abusing and how to de-escalate, how to speak to that person, but we didn't focus on those who had been abused. And so I thought this would kind of connect with that, with how do we support those students who, I mean, honestly, any student of color in the United States has dealt with some sort of cultural, abuse, I think. So Rolando and I worked together on this, and I think he has had a lot of interaction and listened to a lot of to trials and concerns of Latino students, and I've had much, I think, more interaction with Black students, whether they're African American, or Caribbean, and especially because of the kind of, I teach an African American culture class, it's this conversation. So, and I've already spoken a couple of times in here, particularly kind of lecture-y about why we need to, respond, et cetera, et cetera. So today we wanted to focus more directly on the students' voices, but I will say we're each going to make a few comments about maybe to kind of give a little bit of context. I mean, I'm thinking about international students who are at Lee, who are Black international students from, say, Bahamas, Jamaica, Nigeria, just many Nigerian students. But a quote that I think you might have even heard it at the vigil, but that I've heard is a lot, I wasn't Black until I came to this country. And this feeling is that they're such a very different experience, because it's this feeling of shock that here we are, and all these negative things attached to this constructed idea of Blackness, what that means in this country, isn't attached to them. And so it's very frightening, and especially with when Charlottesville happened, I was seeing some really scared, different than African American students, but some really, really scared, like, I want to go back home, I'm really scared. And so I do think, and some of the comments we have in here, at least one from a Nigerian student, was, I think the vigil did really help provide some of that comfort for them. Then I was thinking about African American students. I guess in my experience, just talking with students, a couple of things. The words I would use to describe would be exhaustion and betrayal. Exhaustion because trying to prove and legitimize their fear and pain. Why should we even talk about this? What's the problem? And then betrayal, if we're silent, or if we're not really, we kind of have opinions on things that are really so deeply connected with their being, but don't sort of listen to their stories. And then a lot of them mentioned just feeling betrayed, very confused about the white evangelical church, all kinds of political issues that are in there. But I was going to read from this article that I just came across. It's from the Reformed African Americans Network, and Race Conversations for People of Color in the Trump Era. And I thought this really encapsulated kind of what I'm hearing. I believe white persons enter into the race conversation from the starting point of an onlooker, a researcher, or a student. People of color do not get to enter the conversation from any starting point. On the contrary, we are born into the conversation. We don't not get to choose a vantage point, because in reality, we are inside the issue. Conversations of race for people of color are not simply relaxed rhetoric thrown around for conversation's sake, but are most often verbalized cries and pleas to see pain. Coming into the race conversation as an onlooker, researcher, or student isn't an issue for me. White persons were not born having to realize or see their color, and that is not a personal fault. What matters more to me, and this is an African American author, is not how you enter the conversation, but what you do once you were there and what you do after. Many times conversations of race turn into historical debates about how much racism used to be a problem and how much better we are now, instead of it being a time where humility and compassion can be employed to talk about a serious issue. it ends up being a battle of who paid more attention in their whitewashed history class. And regardless of the outcome, the person of color generally spends a significant amount of emotional energy trying to be gracious with ignorant questions, rebuff skewed points of history, and all around try not to look like the angry black person to try to preserve some form of credibility. Simply put, people of color often feel the burden of proving our pain to our white brothers and sisters, and that is extremely taxing. So I thought, this to me sounds, this isn't a student, but this sounds a very well written description of what I'm hearing from students. And one thing that is revisited frequently in this survey, I mean, probably the most said thing is how hurtful it is when these issues are not mentioned in class. And they said, you know, professors think that it's neutral, or they're being, you know, preventing from hurting other students, but for these students, it's not neutral, it's choosing a side. And it is being complicit, and it's not caring about them. And they asked, please speak up for us. And then I was thinking, well, what about the white students? Are we afraid of alienating them and being devices? I've heard that concern from some professors, but I just feel like the experience in the past couple of years, I feel like my classes have gotten better because I've brought these issues up more. And I feel like I've seen many white students respond, because then when the voices of the students of color, when they feel safe and they begin to speak more and they feel empowered to speak, and the white students hear bits of their story, it is life-changing. And I've got, even just a couple weeks ago, we read Othello, and it has lots of race profiling issues, of course, very relevant. And I played a song by Trip Lee, who's spoken in chapel, about his experiences of racial profiling and his fear of this could have been me. And wow, out of 90 students, I had them write. They were supposed to connect this with Othello and then also give me a personal response. And I would say it was unbelievable, the amount of empathy and the amount of surprise and shock from me. Of course, the black students were like, this sounds like my daily life, I get this. A lot of the white students were like, I can't believe that. I've never heard this. I didn't understand. Or I thought this. They literally said things like, I thought black people were threatening. I've been taught that. They wrote how they've used the N-word in their home. They told me specific, it was like this confessionals, and there was such a sense of shame attached to it. So I like to go back to those students and say, don't be ashamed, be really proud that you are actually, it's very, it takes a lot of strength to acknowledge this and to want to learn more and to understand. And so, and from that, I don't know, I just have rarely seen white students feel left out or frustrated. They've not expressed. Maybe one or two, I did have one response that was incredibly overtly racist. But that's, so it was just interesting. And I'm thinking about MLK's focus on, caring for the souls of those who are even complicit in oppression. He was talking a lot about overt racism, but he was also talking about kind of covert, just being implicit, not even realizing that you're doing things. And he was caring for the soul. So if we are thinking about spiritual formation and helping with developing, citizen, what is the responsible citizenship and all of the things, that we're supposed to think about. The core values. This is a part of it. I think it's, I think this is spiritual development, because when we're talking about sin, we're talking about patterns of sin. And to speak openly and frankly, I just feel like it's very good for the students, the dominant culture students and the others. So I was just wanted to give a little introduction to this. And now you're going to speak.
Thank you, Mary. This afternoon, I was in my office preparing and reviewing my notes for the presentation of today when a student who graduated from Lee a couple of years ago now, he just finished his master's degree in music in a city not too far from here. He was my student in New Testament message of New Testament. I remember he's Caucasian, white, because I try to integrate religion and culture in my class, even when I teach New Testament. So I think he felt comfortable to come to me and invite me to and ask me, Dr. Cuellar, can we have lunch, in the cafeteria? I said, sure. So we went to the cafeteria to have lunch. So we're eating, and then he says, can I share this with something with you? I said, sure. He said, my dad is a pastor in his city, and he told me my dad lost his job just a couple of weeks ago. I said, what was the reason? He said, well, I was one Sunday, an African American family showed up to church, and my dad was very welcoming and told him, welcome to come. If you don't have a church to attend, you can come and be with us. And after the service, some leaders of the church approached the pastor and said, Pastor, if you will continue to do this kind of welcoming to black people into our congregation, we need to talk. Mm-hmm. And he says, well, I need to be, I'm trying to be biblical in my doing my ministry, and this is what Jesus will do. That's what we learn in Scripture. He said, no, we really seriously, we need to talk to you seriously if you are doing this kind of thing. So to their surprise, to everybody's surprise, next Sunday, this African American family brought another family with them because they saw, well, this pastor is friendly, is welcoming. So that was the last Sunday of, So in fact, when he came to visit me, I said, I'm not going to mention his name, but I told him, in fact, this afternoon I'm presenting with Dr. McCampbell, a workshop that deals with racism. And I remember your story that you told me probably 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And he said, yeah, that happened. He says, now I'm a public school teacher in elementary. And he says, even I can hear those children talking racist comments, So then I remember that anthropologists said that by the age 5 years old, most of the children already have their worldview shaped by the influence of their context and their parents and their community. So I like to share a few of my comments with the powerful words of Paul the Apostle. He says, you are all sons and daughters of God through faith in Jesus Christ. For all you were baptized into Christ, have clothed yourself with Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Jesus Christ. Galatians chapter 3, verse 26, 28. So I would like to follow this with the words of the African scholar, young Beatty. He says these powerful words. He says, we have eaten theology with you, talking about the Western theologians. We have drunk theology with you. We have dreamed theology with you. But it has been one side. It has been, in one sense, your theology. We know you theologically. The question is, do you know us theologically? Would you like to know us theologically? I think even we have been doing theology in one direction, only from the Western theologians just exporting their theology around that, just not to really bother and take the time to know what African theologians have to offer to us, or Hispanic theologians and so on. So what I'd like to share with you is just some remarks about how Hispanic students face many challenges when they come to study in college. The educational background of Latino students are not as strong as their classmates who are Anglos. Therefore, college education is very hard for them. I can include myself that coming to Lee, with little knowledge of the culture and the language and so on. What makes it even more complicated is that many times their professors do not understand their backgrounds, and the examples and explanation in the classroom are completely foreign to the Latino students. most likely, Latino students are the first one in their families to enroll in college. In other words, they do not have the familiar or cultural background or framework to process their experiences. In addition to the challenge in the classroom, Latino students face crisis of identity in relation to their mother tongue versus English. They wish to be part of the majority culture. They want to blend, and but they can, because they don't want to be discriminated or marginalized by these students, the majority culture. So what does it mean to be Latino? Even my own children ask me this. Daddy, are you from Peru? My mom is from Chile. I was born in North America, the United States. Who am I? What is my identity really, Are they proud or ashamed of their culture, background, or their parents? Do they have the liberty to express with their music and speak Spanish among themselves? Or most of them come from full families, and they don't have the money to enjoy some things that they see their students who are Anglo can afford to do that. But an important question to ask is, do they have Latino professors, or professors like some of you perhaps, or most of you, who really identify with them, and the students have the trust and say, they don't feel intimidated to talk to you about some of these issues. The report that you are going to receive, or you are in your hands, for our students of color, provide clear evidence of the need for faculty openness and willingness to engage more often with their students of color. They are not arguing that our attitudes as faculty members are deliberately or intentionally discouraging, but some of our attitudes are affecting negatively. A question that demands to be answered is this: has the faculty member done something constructive about race relation inside and outside of the classroom? The words of Martin Luther King Jr. represent many minorities that majority culture might assume. This is the words of Martin Luther King Jr. In the midst of blatant injustices inflicted upon the Negro, I have watched white churches stand on the sidelines and merely mouth pious irrelevancies and sanctimonious trivialities. In the midst of a mighty struggle to rid our nation of racial and economic injustice, I have heard so many ministers say, those are social issues with which the gospel has nothing to do with. And I have watched so many churches commit themselves to a completely otherworldly religion, which made a strange distinction between bodies and souls, the sacred and the secular. And he's right. I think the Enlightenment has influenced how we do this, how we study the Bible, how we manage even the instruction in our classroom, because we compartmentalize the supernatural and the natural, and we compartmentalize religion and science, when really I think it's time for us to integrate this, rather than compartmentalize.
I think that, thank you so much. That was thought-provoking. And I think that we were just now going to maybe look at this and maybe kind of highlight a few that and I accidentally left a page out, which I will email. I'll the email form, I'll attach it to it and send it, but maybe you can read from his, but maybe point out a few of these. Do you have one that you want to maybe do first?
Yes.
Or have us look at?
In the student number 1, you have your copies there. I know we try to keep the obviously anonymous list, but I have this student in one class, Elise, Lee, and she's an American citizen. She was born here, but her parents not. And then obviously because she attends a Hispanic church, and she has friends and family, and as she said, that the DACA has, she said, made a big impact on my friends and family members, and it's difficult to talk about this topic. As you know, on September 5th, which really was my birthday, it was sad notice that, our president, removed DACA, and basically something that was protecting over 100,000 students who, by this executive action by former President Obama. And this student says, I have found the courage to speak to one faculty on campus about this subject, and it was because she asked me during an advising session. If she had not asked, I would not have mentioned anything. But even then, I did not discuss how I felt about these labels. I kept our conversation on the surface and simply mentioned how I felt discouraged for my friends and family. I feel underrepresented on campus, and for this reason, it is hard for me to speak out. I cannot imagine how much more my DACA friends may feel. It's hard to find the courage to speak up. Lee knows we are underrepresented population, but what they are doing about it. Cleveland is full of Latino residents, and I feel that Lee is the last place they are looking into. What kind of students is Lee targeting when they promote enrollment? I love Lee, but sometimes I question the intention. It's a powerful voice. I know it's hard.
I was looking at student 4, and then its response number 4, which I thought was really helpful. This is African American student. This is actually an alum. A few of these are graduates. I contacted, but I thought this one was really helpful. If a student expresses that they feel they are being targeted because of their race, it is not the time to play devil's advocate. Majority of the time, we beat ourselves up and battle within ourselves, hoping that race has nothing to do with it. If we muster up the courage to actually say something, there's more than likely some validity to it. I'm not saying trust them every single time. I'm saying validate their feelings first before you try to tell them they may be looking at the wrong way. And I'm just thinking about, from the students that I have talked about, especially the African American students I've talked to about this, they don't speak out very much about the things that have happened to them, especially when things are said by professors. Because they say, and it's mentioned in here, I don't want to be seen as the person who's playing the race. I don't want to be the girl who always talks about race, or the guy who always talks about race. And they kind of even laugh it off, but it happens a lot. And so I thought this was really helpful. It's not the time to say, are you sure that's what it is? I thought that was really helpful, because I think if we question them, it makes them more and more kind of shrink into themselves and think, I'm just not going to say anything in class, or I'm not going to do anything. So
Karen, Dr. Dixon was telling me, he came to my class not too long ago, and Sam. And in fact, we were talking about this issue of racism in the class. That was the topic for that day. And I have 2 African American in that class. So I was going around the class and asking, have you experienced racism? Can you speak? I mean, there was it seems that everybody was kind of intimidated to speak. In fact, I intentionally asked one of the African American students, have you experienced racism? She just didn't say anything. So Dr. Dixon, after my class, was giving me some tips, some ideas, practical ideas. He said, Rolando, why you don't invite these 2 students, maybe for a cup of coffee, and ask them, maybe in that meeting, maybe they will be able to speak. And she said, one of the students who spoke in the prayer vigil, when we approached the first time, I said, can you speak? And she said, no, I'm not going to speak. But then when we really went and had, I think, a lunch or something with her or with him, the student was able to say, to open up and share. And then he or she spoke at the prayer vigil. So See, so Dr. Dixon was saying, I think you should maybe try this, maybe approach the student not in the classroom, but maybe in a more personal way.
And I've seen that. I had a student once contact me at like 11 o'clock at night on a weekend about a profiling incident, which really did end up being a profiling incident, and I wasn't going to question whether it was, was trying, but she said, and I hesitate even to say these things because I don't want it to be like I'm puffing myself up, but I'm just thinking this is something that really hit me, that she said, because I had spoken with her a few times and encouraged her to speak out in class because she's really quiet, that she felt safe contacting me. And she said, usually I would just not do anything about this, but because there's this sense of if there's someone there who believes me, that we'd had conversations before about some of the racial issues that she'd experienced. She was from Mississippi, and so she contacted me, and then it ended up being dealt with very well by the administration. I mean, she ended up feeling so cared and loved. I basically just kind of told her who to speak to and kind of connected them, and Mike Hayes and others that. I mean, she ended up thinking, wow, they really care about me. And now I know, I'm glad I said something. She was so glad that but she said, if it had been last semester, I wouldn't have said anything at all to anybody.
Yeah.
Because, that was that fear. But just thinking, I'm just realizing now this thing is so long. We have so many comments. I haven't even been able to really, some of them I got sort of at, this more, is it too late? Is it too late? This.
I'd like to share student number 3.
Okay.
In fact, she's actually a master. No, actually, came back to Lee and do the nursing studies now. She did biology previously, and she said, I'm a U.S. citizen. I have been living in the States since I was 6 years old. So even though I'm Chilean, parents are from Chile, this is home to me. I grew up in Miami. I love the diversity. I live in a bubble, and I don't recall ever feeling discriminated against there. In 2001, I moved here to finish my bachelor degree in biology. I graduated, got married, and decided to settle down here. Now, you will expect that in a predominantly Christian city like Cleveland, Tennessee, racism will never have a home. But alas, this is where my unprejudiced experience came to an end. I had to put up with jokes about my ethnicity and questions about my legal status. My husband was told, we are building a tall wall for people like you. Some of my US-born teenage nieces and nephews have been called, quote unquote, dumb Mexicans. I have been told to go back to their countries. My sister were yelled at and asked if they were illegals. On 2 separate occasions, my late father was asked by a nurse and a doctor when he was planning to learn to speak English. I have to watch my kids get snubbled at the grocery store, at the school. I could go on and on. What I want you to know is that the racist doesn't care whether I'm a tax-paying, law-abiding U.S. citizen or not. All they see is somebody who looks like a foreigner.
I have one that, and then I think we should maybe discuss. Yeah, but I have one more. I mean, I have snippets from several that I could share, but there was one from a student number 19, who wrote me, and she's an EBS, and she said, I know I'm not a student of color, but can I please share something? And her perspective, I think, is really needs to be heard. So page, I should have numbered these pages. Student 19, I would like to take a moment to express what it's like being the minority in EVS. I'm white, like most here at Lee, but this is my first semester in EVS. In EVS, I am one of 11 white students out of 62. Since joining EVS, I have encountered name-calling, mocking, and very rude comments from the campus of Lee. I'm a leader on campus and have never had anything said to me before the semester. I've had students and teachers ask, why EVS? Wouldn't have campus choirs or singers been a better fit for you? Those don't seem like your people. What do you mean those don't seem like my people? No, I didn't try out for other choirs. No, this wasn't my only option. I made the choice to join. They picked me, not my skin color. I've had so many remarks as to, they only wanted you because you're white from other students or more discreetly from teachers. Wow, they are becoming really diverse. I think the most absurd comment I received, I guess it's a type of, from a student while at dinner with a group as that, it's her name, only joined EVS because she is a nigger lover and wants black babies. I left the restaurant earlier in tears. EVS has never made me feel white, but everyone else around me reassures me that I don't fit in. If you don't believe me, watch as we are on tour. If we stop at a gas station, I'm often asked by others there if I'm okay, or most commonly stared at. Students joke and say, why would they make you guys all wear black for choir performances? Don't they know their heads will just be floating? Or I hope your uniform isn't all white because they would wash you out, but they would look good. That would wash you out, but they would look good. I've had several male white friends to tell me to watch out for the black boys. They just want to do bad things to me. EVS isn't a black choir. EVS is a choir that is family. I believe personally that many of our minority students group into EVS because that is a safe place. We are all family. They do life with me. These are the people that I break bread with, that I pray with, that I argue with, that come over to do my hair and cry with me. They are not my black friends or my service project. Oftentimes they're serving me because I'm a mess. They are quick to give, to love, and to share whatever they have. They are also hurting because of the way the campus acts. No, we don't see people running through the Ped Mall yelling racial slurs, but we also don't see complete equal rights in the voices of those I do life with being heard. I shouldn't be questioned by security as to why I'm walking with a male EVS member at night and if I'm okay. They live in this fear that if someone around them yells the wrong words at the wrong time, they could be hurt. They are afraid to go to Walmart at certain times without a group. That isn't okay. We have a problem that we really need to address, and I think that starts with our leadership and professors asking themselves where they stand and how they live. I was completely blown away by this. And I mean, I think, and I talked to the student, and I think it is, if you align yourself openly with people or persons of color, then you also become the target. And you get a tiny bit, so she's getting a little taste of, you know, I tell students, the first time I started really waking up to these sorts of things is when our next door neighbors moved in, and the man was black, his wife was Sri Lankan. My mom and I babysat his child, and walking around with the child in a stroller, the dirty looks we got. And it was like I was blind to all of this until I was standing there, and then I felt the pain of it. And it hurt me that they could look at a baby that way. And so I thought this was a really important perspective to include. So anyway, we ended up talking a lot, Rolando. But do you guys have any thoughts or comments? I don't know if you've been able to scan. It's a lot.
I know I want to take it home and read it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm actually thinking,
Yeah.
should we send out an email and have people read it and then say, do you want to come and talk? Because I thought about it, because I was like, this is really long. There's no way we can.
Yeah.
But from what we brought up, maybe any of your experiences or thoughts or questions.
Yeah, I'm trying to learn how to have these conversations. It's always been something I cared about, but I tended not to talk very explicitly about it in class. And particularly right now, at our moment nationally, it's that issue of vocation that's getting me. I sort of feel like I'm called in my work to have these conversations.
Yeah.
Because, first of all, our students of color need to know that I have strong feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most of my classes are clearly majority white, as most of our classes on campus are. And I've been thinking it's really important for those white students to hear a faculty member say, this is unacceptable. And I try not to make my classes overly political, which is hard because I teach rhetoric, and you know, we have to engage some. But I think I'm making my peace with going there.
Yeah.
And conversations like this, I'm trying to learn from other people how to do that in a way that's still productive. But just last week, when the NFL thing broke, that was last week,
yeah.
right? I talked about it in class, and we happened to be reading a memoir that by a white writer, but where he touched on the Black Lives Matter movement and the violence against African American men, and he wrote about his strong activism in support of that movement, and so it was kind of a natural place to come up. And so I talked about it, and I was very, very, very frank in sharing my feelings. And after that class, later the afternoon, an African American student came to my office, and she's someone I've taught for many semesters. I've known her a long time, but we've never talked about stuff like this. But she made a special trip to come to my office, and she wanted to just sit down and say, "Now I know you have strong feelings about this. Can I just unload for a minute?" And so we sat there and we just unloaded. And she talked about being on Facebook and people saying horrible things on Facebook, and that really struck me. That I feel like she's someone who's a friend of mine. You know, as much as a student is our friend, you know that. But that we had never had any of these kind of conversations, and just me mentioning it in class that day was enough to make her come to my office that afternoon. And so I'm seeing the importance of it. I'm still not sure what I'm doing most of the time. I don't know if you guys are.
I said something, I was like, should I have said that? But I think when you mentioned the memoir, I mean, I have learned, and the thing is, because it's rhetoric, so you do have a lot of writing.
Yeah.
I think including us, even for like, well, one of the students mentioned about doing a devotional, even if you don't have a class, because you're not teaching, literature but in a devotional, in a theological context, bring it up, but in your context, having a reading, and looking at the rhetoric in it, of course. I feel like I'm cheating because I'm like, well, I'm reading Othello, so that's that takes us there. But even, I have found, different ways to slip things, not slip it in like it's sneaky, but to kind of include it But then I even think, have I said that the right way, and is it hurt? But I think the best, I'm just learning, I'm a student of that, like, this is not really my world, my culture, this is not my experience, and so listening to this and having a student like come to you then and say, let me tell you about it, because I was reading just, the ones that Rolando got, and I thought, I haven't had enough conversations with Hispanic students. Like, I have a lot that I have had in class, and then I think they do feel safe to talk, but I'm just thinking I want to make more of an effort with a variety of students that feel like they're different in this context. And
I think from my standpoint, when I've been coming to sessions like this one, I'm trying to make sense of how, in the kinds of classes that I'm teaching, I can affirm people in a way that is meaningful without making an issue of something in a class that doesn't really fit with what we're talking about in the class, so it's
I feel like it's tacked on.
And I feel like that can be kind of artificial too, but we did have, occasionally there are moments, where we, in my second language acquisition theory class, a bunch of my students went to a conference, an ESL conference in town. It's a small regional thing. And so I had them share about, what were some of the sessions they went to in class. And actually there was, at this particular conference, there was a session where a Guatemalan man shared about his experiences of being an immigrant in America and, dealing with racism and different things. And then there was another session that was given by an immigration lawyer who was, just kind of explaining the rights that people have, and and they actually provided booklets, as many as you wanted, for all your students, kind of thing, that explains, what your legal rights are as documented, undocumented, whatever, which I thought was really helpful to have a copy of, so I have something I can turn to. But I was grateful that they were talking in my class about these, how helpful it was to hear this information and that kind of thing. And in TESOL, I think we tend to have people who are a little more open towards others. I mean, after all, they're planning to teach English to people who don't speak it, so that's their population. But still, it's something that I just get really discouraged, and on the one hand, I don't want to single people out and make them a representative for their
course, yeah,
race,
that's-
you know, kind of
they-
thing, and so
that's-
I don't want to do that.
Right.
But sometimes I feel like if I have one or two students in my class who are African American or Latino, and then I start talking about racial issues, that it's kind of like directed to them or something, you know, so I feel this awkwardness, but I had an experience when I was living in Russia for a season. I know I'm talking about a lot of scattered thoughts here, but I had a season where the university I was working with was trying to build a building, and there was an extremely active and very ugly group of people who were protesting what we were doing, and it was a really unusual experience for me as a white American to be in a situation where people just hated me for what I represented and without knowing anything about me. You know, I mean, like they just saw me as evil and a representative of evil, and you know, they just didn't care about any facts about what we were really doing. I mean, like, don't distract me with the facts. This is just, I'm going to believe this horrible thing about you. And there was a short season there where they were so angry and so ugly about what they were doing that I really believed that it was possible that they could kill me. I mean, like, probably was never a reality, but you know, it doesn't matter whether it's real if you think it's real, you know?
And at least you perceive that.
Yeah, because I mean, they were people who just really believed that we were destroying the moral fiber of Russia, you know, I mean, like they just could not accept who we were. They believed we were these like manipulating Protestant spies for the US government or something, I don't know what, but anyway, so when I think about, you know, living through that season and just what the sort of emotional pressure was, I mean, like just the exhaustion levels are a lot greater, because even though I'm very good at compartmentalizing, what I realized is that whenever you're compartmentalizing negative things, it's a drain on energy. You know, like it just takes energy to do that. And you can ignore it and sort of go on with your life, but you're still carrying that burden under the surface, and it's draining you, you know, your energy. And so, you know, I reflect on that experience, and I think about people who every day are dealing with, if I go to the store right now, I could get pulled over by the police, and who knows what that could lead to, or, you know, where it has nothing to do with their character or who they are or what they've accomplished in their life. I mean, really established, wonderful people who are brilliant get pulled over and treated like hoodlums because they're black or, you know, whatever. And so, I don't know, it just makes me so hurt and angry that we have to be at this point in 2017, you know, and I think that this was the biggest thing that really has been difficult with me in the last year of our political life in America. And in some respects, maybe the silver lining is that because things are so overt now, we're talking about it and we're not pretending that we're on a sort of trajectory where things are improving, you know. But I mean, I think, you know, I wanted to believe in years past that as horrible as things were, at least more people were getting the message, you know, and we were moving in a positive direction, you know. And now there's no way to come to that conclusion anymore. You know?
I was just thinking about with your TESOL, I'm thinking, but that is so much about empathy, because it's about kind of stepping into someone else's culture. So it does seem like maybe there would be interesting ways to enter that conversate, you know. Even like in a devotion, sometimes I like to do devotionals that actually do connect them with the subject matter of the class, you know, that sort of thing. But this is all about trying to teach
TESOL class, I can do that more because we're talking about ethical issues and you know, that kind of thing, and you know, world Englishes and you know, all of these things that bring up racial kinds of issues. But you know, when I'm teaching grammar, it's harder to you know, kind of like work that in somehow. But
In our vocational track, we have students, you know, you have our students in the TESOL program. And I noticed the students who are in that track, in the vocational track, have developed a lot of sensitivity
Mm-hmm.
before. You know, for example, some of your students are teaching English on
Mhm.
Saturdays, not only on Thursday here,
yeah.
but on Saturday in the local church. And two of my students invited me one day, so my wife and I went there. We met people from Africa, from the Caribbean, from South America, Central America, and these students are teaching English to them, and they begin to hear their stories. This is some similar stories that we're sharing here. So these students become more open and more showing develop empathy to the issues that the immigrants face. You know, living in this context. You know, so that's a good thing. I think that's very
Yeah.
important that our students are your students are developing that kind of embracing foreign people, not only teaching them for this, but just kind of identify with the issues that they go through. You want to share practical ideas? What the practical ideas are we thinking?
Well, one thing I'm just thinking, and I brought these. I can't remember where my things are. These flyers I'll give to you. You know, and now for, you know, just these kind of, because the racial justice kind of loose organization group thing that we've done. It's not a club, and it's more kind of organic. In my case, was saying he liked it that it was kind of that way, and just to say it's because last year, when right after I think Rolando Cuellar had been shot and the tension was so high, I believe Indy Asia, you know, was just on Facebook writing just the pain she was dealing with and the fear, and Carolyn Dirksen said, "What can I do to help?" And she said, could we just have a group where we talk about this together at least? So Carolyn opened up her home, and then I think it was Jared Wilford that said, could we do something like this every month, to have a space where students of color who are dealing with things can openly talk about it, and also to have advocates there, but it's also going to educate, you know, and bring people in the space. And so we sort of started that last year. And so when faculty members come, it really, it means so much to the students to come to those kinds of things. And also another thing, because there are other like bigger events that we're doing, you know, like lectures and things. A good thing about that is you can invite your class, and then if you see one of your students there, you can say, "What did you think about that?" You know, that's a way to kind of not awkwardly enter this conversation. So that's another kind of maybe a resource for professors to be able to invite. So, yeah. So I'll hand you these things.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a few ideas that
Like
I don't know if you can read that, but I think from out of these comments from the students, I think that maybe we can be more inclusive in the content of our material, using some authors from different cultural backgrounds as well, because sometimes, you know, obviously we are here in North America, and we try to use only writers from this context, but I think it would be a good idea to bring some authors from other contexts, from other part of the world, that somehow students can also have been reading some of those, you know. I think students of color have different learning styles, as you know. We need probably develop some methods of teaching and how to teach more effectively to reach those students. For example, Latinos and other cultures like African culture tend to be more group oriented. You know, maybe to do more exercise, you know, divide our class in groups. I think Jean Ellis did a wonderful workshop not too long ago here about, you know, I think we really need to empower our students even through techniques of teaching. You know, I think Paulo Freire talks about, you know, education brings liberation. You know, if we only just do just the lecture type, you know, just trying to pass information to the student, we not encourage the students to think for themselves and to develop, you know. So we think we need to probably implement some other methodologies or techniques, you know. And as you mentioned, Mary, I think probably we need to be intentional and maybe open, to leave an open discussion on racial tensions, as an emotional perhaps in a classroom, or maybe before the end of the class session, maybe bring something, that encourage to think the students about race issues, to develop sensitivity to other students who come from other contexts.
Absolutely. I think we're out of time. Are we out of time? Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate all that I've been aware of you both and others doing to keep this conversation alive on campus. Just appreciate.
Yeah, and I
Your
appreciate you
hearts.
gathering some research for us.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I'll take that home, and instead of grading papers, I would.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
I'd probably rather learn this.
Well, thank you for
Coming
coming.
in.
Thank
Yeah.
you.